But I began to notice the same thing that I'd noticed going out on fishing boats. There was evidence of other oil wrecks, once from hundreds of years ago, man-made objects on the bottom. I decided to go look for sunken treasure. I wasn't quite sure just what I'd find, but I bought myself an oil boat, fixed it up, and sure enough, I just started discovering a lot of oil shipwrecks. The sharks would follow you. And I always figured the biggest risk was the school of small ones, 4 foot, 5 footers, than one big one. There's times that I'd look behind me a couple of times and it was a good size dusky or maybe a tiger, and they would follow you or follow the boat. I think they could sense fear or something when you were at the door comfortable. And then as long as they just swam along, eating wasn't on their mind. But as soon as they started swimming all around like that, then first of all, you pulled yourself up so you were closer to the boat with the ladder hanging over, and then you got out.
Well, he started at a very young age. He left school, we might say ahead of time, and of course, needed a job. And because he was around the water, he knew a lot of the fishermen, and different environment, they just took him in. He knew the reefs like we know the roads. He could tell people which way to go, and it was just second nature. He was inquisitive. He sort of pushed the boundaries. He wanted to know why things worked, how they worked. It was just a passion.
As far as I know, in my time, that Bermuda's fishing supplies were fairly stable. The seasons and the equipment and the weather just pretty well governed the fish. What really started to destroy that was the plastic cover trap, was the end of the fish. It just took a nosedive in a very few years. And then it was another situation here that was easily monitored. It was that some of the older fishermen had been fishing in the 150 fathom range for a large grouper that we had here, and 2 species of red snapper. And they used to anchor the boat on the shelf and slack it back. And you hand lined them, and you had a hand reel to crank up the line, and they caught these fish, and they had been catching them for years. And that was a resource that people had been catching fish here for this fish as long as I had remembered. And then fisheries, or the UN, came here, and then they showed the fishermen here how to put down, say, 4 or 5 lines on buoys with 18 to 30 hooks on them. And in 3 years, the fisheries was gone.
Because he started at a young age, he could see change. And it might not necessarily have made an impact on him when he was younger, but as he got older, he could see that the change was not for the better. And it was a dramatic change.
It's an empty space just before you let it go. Underwater hunting, it's like you're flying, right? You're going through the water over a landscape, but you know, it's underwater, it's not in the air, but you get that sort of same sensation. But when you're holding your breath underwater, you can't think about anything else, right? You're not worried about what happened at work last week. That all fades away to nothing. And the silence underwater, you know, all you'll hear is the popping and cracking of the little shrimps and things that are living in the reef. But that solitude and the moments just before you're letting it go, you can't beat it, and it's nothing like it. There's really nothing like it. Just a general decline in numbers of everything, and the size of what is now available to us. Black groupers, for example. When I first started, when I was really young, and back then fish pots were still legal, so there was a lot of arrowhead traps in the water. And you go looking for them when you're spearfishing. I'm not saying you'd never see one, but it wasn't super common. And then after the traps were banned, it took a while, I'd say maybe between 10 and 15 years. Now all of a sudden there's groupers everywhere. Like you go out to a spot that you've never seen one and wow, there's groupers here. And yes, fish swim, you know, they move, and who's to say that that grouper wasn't there but just over here and you missed it. But they tend to stay where there's a food source. So if there's not enough food for them to eat, they're not going to hang around unless they're baited. But we started seeing more of them more frequently in different areas where we weren't seeing them a lot before. And then after that, you see these guys that are trolling for them, and they're setting fixed gear for them. And even if they're not taking more than they're supposed to, which is only one per day, I think the effectiveness of the trolling for them has caused another decline. Because I've seen them come back where I would go to a spot where I'd see literally 50 to 100 of them. And I've been back to that spot year over year and witnessed this little sort of mini aggregation. And then with the excessive pressure, line fishing as well, they're gone. I mean, I go back there now and I might see 5 or 6 if I'm lucky, you know.
Bermuda, we're only 22 square miles, but there are hundreds of square miles of reef, and it's just where I found my place. I was surprised at myself that I like the hunting side of it. I never really thought I was that kind of a thing, but there's something about being out there and gathering your own snacks. When I'm in the water, my heartbeat slows, my breathing relaxes. It's like a Control-Alt-Delete for your body and brain. It was basically 6 guys. We'd go out in the boat, we'd see what we could get, we'd come back in the evening, our significant others would come down, we'd have a barbecue, there may be beer involved. Then there became more people who were more interested in it and they wanted to come, and it just got to the size that, well, we can't really manage this on a small scale anymore. And there was a gentleman who had kind of suggested, hey, why don't we kind of have a little competition? We'll do it the first weekend of September. You know, I'll give prizes, Making Waves can give prizes. And it's like, it's a great idea. And that, I think, was in '97, and it grew from there. Also, over the years, we were finding that it was harder to find as many lobsters as quickly. The density of lobsters on reef and in caves definitely changed, where we were often seeing caves with multiple lobsters. I mean, you know, 4, 5, 10, 12, like, you know, bushels of lobsters. These days, you see a pair, that's really quite something. Those kind of things are one of the reasons why we decided to stop the lobster tournament. I started to feel maybe it's time. It should be my responsibility to help protect this for the next generations. I don't want to stop them from doing it, but I want to make sure that it's there. And if that means for us that the lobster tournament has to stop, then that's what has to happen. And 2024, it was enough, unfortunately. But
the ocean is my happy place. When I get to get in the water and go dive, it's like you escape all the troubles of what's happening on land and just seeing something that most people never get to see. Being a Bermudian, I never really spent a lot of time in the water. But my first time actually sticking my head into the water and looking down and seeing what was there was magical. It opened up my eyes to a whole new world. Being able to breathe underwater was the most exciting part. I mean, like, I almost felt like an astronaut, you know? I felt like an astronaut without paying the price of becoming an astronaut. The dive shops I worked at more or less catered to your average vacation tourist that came down, stayed in the hotels. And you can hop on a boat and within 5 minutes be at your favorite wreck dive site, yeah. So early 2000s, you would see a lot more fish, and as time's gone on, it's slowly been decreasing. For example, now you can go to a lot of the sites and you come across a handful of fish. You may see a couple of snappers, maybe a grouper here and there. I mean, groupers are extremely rare. So you don't see the big schools of horse-eyed jacks and different fish like that, like the big Graysby snappers and things like that. You just really don't see it anymore.
Well, I mean, Horseshoe Bay is just beautiful, right? So really, I enjoy primarily swimming at Horseshoe Bay. I mean, I swim other places, but if that's the right place to swim, I will make the trip to swim there. There's also the chance you're going to see stuff, right? So, you know, that's part of the, you know, I'm not spearfishing anymore, but I'm always kind of hunting. I don't swim with swim goggles, I swim with a mask because I'm always pretty sure I'm going to see something. You know, occasionally I'll find sunglasses. You know, there's always, but that's it. You know, it's in you to be hunting. The idea of being able to sustain yourself in the environment you're in is pretty fundamental to a feeling of well-being and security, I think, right? You know, we used to do a lot of spearfishing on the breakers, Stuart and I. And literally every breaker you'd pop in on, set a rockfish, 2, 3, every time. And then you'd be looking for hogfish or small red hinds, or really it was also nice schools, not schools, but nice little groups of snappers, like 5 to 10. A good indicator of how much it changed is that I stopped diving with a spear. It wasn't worth it because you weren't seeing them, but it was also that we just started feeling kind of guilty about it. You know, wow, you know, like how many hogfish am I going to kill, you know, before I decide, you know, I'm only seeing them 1/10 of the time I used to. And they got smaller.
The people who are out in the water, the people who are in the water, they know that they are having to work harder to get less reward. And I think that the people who are on the water the most really should be the people who are asked their opinion more often about how things are out there.
Fish stocks are still diminishing. And when you start to get small fish, small animals, is definitely a sign of overfishing. Yeah. And the other day, when we were out here, the same day we caught the little leopard shark, or tiger shark. It was a little wahoo about, couldn't have weighed more than 12 or 15 pounds, which you never saw. It was swimming back and forth around the boat in the chum line. If it hadn't had his stripes on, you'd have thought it was a small barracuda. And that's something you never saw.
You could set your watch and they'd show up for breakfast and dinner. But we used to see them almost every day. And when I was, well, small, I couldn't swim off the boat unless someone was watching me, because they'd just show up.
In the afternoon, I used to get down on the dive platform. And of course, they were, every Bermudians like shark, you hashed it. I would flip my hands like that, and when the shark came to bite him, I'd get him by the dorsal fin or the back of the neck and throw him up in the cockpit of the boat. And you could always get whatever you want, 3 or 4 if you want. Had several people wanted a couple of sharks. I've seen times that in 15 minutes you throw 7 or 8 in the cockpit.
Teddy used to talk about it, but since I never saw them inside the reef, like ever, it just, you know, they were like mythological stories. You were like, oh yeah, sharks. I mean, you know, I hear about some divers who couldn't work a shipwreck, you know, that they'd found that they were quite attached to. They just, every time they went there, there'd be too many sharks, so they'd leave. And it just is just an absolutely foreign idea. So yeah, it's not even like a generational shift. It just seems, it's almost like you'd say it's not true, you know? So yeah, no, we are a generation without sharks.
I was always told that there were no sharks in Bermuda. Bermuda had no sharks.
So it's not something you worry too much about when you go out there?
No, absolutely not. I'm not looking over my shoulder looking for sharks. So yeah, that's the last thing I'm worried about.
Well, I think that he was so interested in everything in the ocean that he could never seem to get enough. So people would dive and go down in, you know, with one tank, but he'd go down all day because he just was not finished doing what he was doing, sort of thing. And so that's how he observed so much.
You never know what you're going to find. It's just incredible, and it's always something different. When you find something that's, you know, 100, 200, 300, 400 years old, it's just unbelievable. You know, it's indescribable. And of course, one man's trash is another man's treasure, as Teddy used to like to say. And I've been diving for bottles for 55 years, and I found bottles and artifacts I didn't even know existed until this year. I hadn't even seen them in books, you know, until I found one. I remember diving here, my first dive, in November of 1968 on the outer reef. And from the time I went in the water, I was just in schools of fish. You couldn't even see the bottom, just massive schools of fish. And over a period of about, well, from 1968 to 1988, about 20 years, fish potting took thousands and thousands of fish. And one of the dive magazines came here, went diving in Bermuda, and wrote an article, I think it was 88 or 89, said, there's no fish in Bermuda. The reefs are healthy, but there's no fish. When we went out, we realized all the fish had disappeared. It had happened so gradually over that 30-year period that it really didn't dawn on us until somebody with, an open mind, without bias, just came in and said, "Oh, there's no fish on your reefs." And we went, and there weren't. They were gone.
A big part of my job is promoting Bermuda and helping the world see Bermuda through our shipwrecks and making, bringing up the value of them and thus bringing up the value of Bermuda. And it's true, we have stunning shipwrecks, stunning dives. You'd have very serious divers coming here, people who've filmed all over the world, worked in the water all over the world, particularly camera people, right? They were the ones who had very pointedly said this, who said, "Wow, you guys have a beautiful reef, where's the fish?" And so I think it was that outside perspective that first made me kind of go, yeah, where are all the fish?
It's not like it used to be. You used to have to swim through schools of fish and almost essentially push fish out of your way as you're swimming. Now you can just go through the swim-throughs and not see a thing.
And I hear people say, "Oh, there's lots of black groupers. I see them all the time when I'm diving." Yeah, you see them all the time, but compared to what is it good, right? If you go back to the previous generation and ask them what they think is a lot, they'll tell you it's completely fished out, and there aren't enough of them left. It's nothing in comparison to what it was. I've never seen a shark while free diving on the shelf around the reef in Bermuda. I've been diving in Bermuda for over 40 years, and I have never seen a shark when I'm underwater, right? Now, if you ask one of these old timers who's in their 90s now, when they were fishing about sharks, they'll tell you they were all up in the shallows and in the mangroves, and you would see them regularly. But you just don't see that now. Now it's in social media and all over the news. "Oh, there was a shark in St. George's Harbor. Look, a shark." Where that was commonplace before.
I was fortunate enough to have him out in my boat a couple of times. We're out looking for wrecks. We're going out past Pompano Hogfish Cut, and "Oh wow, Teddy, we were here the other day and we saw a school of 6 hogfish. It's the most hogfish I've seen in so long." And he kind of sucks his teeth and goes, "Why, when I was a boy, there were hundreds of hogfish in this cut. I would wade out from shore with a sharpened spice stick and just dinner." And it was and that's when I had the realization, is okay, every generation is seeing this for the first time. They don't have the perspective that it hasn't always been that way. That you are now seeing something that is basically the tail end of what it used to be. The fact that Hogfish Cut had hundreds of hogfish in it it blows my mind.
I know sort of towards the end, he didn't go fishing as much. And he said, "I'm not going out there and sit all day and catch enough for us for one meal." I think he was disappointed because we could have adjusted along the way you should, and it wasn't being done.
Since the early 1600s, the fish stocks have declined from fishing, from fishing pressure. You couldn't put a hook over without having a barracuda or some fish grab it in 5 seconds, and there was just fish everywhere. The amount of fish that were here in the 60s was mind-boggling. But there had been a decline for 200, 300 years before I started diving, so you can only imagine what was here initially.
Certainly asking ourselves what it should be like is the question, and that's what seeing this footage from Teddy really opened my eyes to. While we're all discussing and conversing our different perceptions of what it's like, we're not actually asking the question of what should it be like.
What that I was disappointed in, that when this was a relatively new fisheries, that I had fished for these in the deep water for probably 25 years or more. And then the UN came here and showed the local fishermen the deep water drop line, multi-hook line. And the government did not, which I urged several times, to have a no fishing zone, probably 4 or 5 miles. It was any coast of Bermuda. And just don't let anybody fish there. And probably off the south shore because it was easiest to see, you could see it from shore because it was only a couple of miles away. You could sit up with binoculars or a boat and see who was fishing where. And to make a long story short, in 3 years, the snapper fishing didn't exist anymore. They caught them.
You think she ripped that, and then by the time she got
Well, we dug down here and rummaged around, and there's a lot of big pieces of rock broken off.
Because I was diving a lot with Teddy Tucker, working a lot with Teddy, and he grew up fishing. That's what they all did, right? He was not a shipwreck hunter, he was a fisherman. And he said, remember, most fishermen back in the day Bermuda were also farmers. And this is exactly how he said it. He said, those men, those farmers, some of them couldn't sign their name on a check. They would have to write an X on their bank book. But they all knew, because they were farmers, that if you have no seed, you have no plant. That if you don't plant seed, you get no crop. And he said it's the same thing for fish.
And that was the old way. Farmers do it, fishermen do it. This is the way you survive. I think reproducing is the biggest key to all of it. You need protected areas that the fish are given a chance.
And this has been the experience in the Florida Keys, where they've created marine sanctuaries. It takes 10 to 30 years for the fish stocks to recover in the sanctuary. The problem is, if you have heavy fishing pressures around the margins of the sanctuary, you can still deplete the fish stocks.
But there's no denying that if you leave a species, this population alone for a period of time, even in just this area, it makes a huge difference. It makes a massive difference. And as long as it is properly enforced and you allow those laws to work like they're supposed to protect the resource, I think we could have a great result from it. I really do.
He saw the problems before it was popular. I think if more people had been aware then, we wouldn't be in our position now. But because of the lifestyle that he had, he observed these things. And of course, it's one person speaking out, and it's like, there he goes again, kind of thing, But he was seeing it.
I still dive regularly and do a lot of fishing. And the sharks have disappeared. And now you're lucky if you catch something that'll fit in the palm of your hand. They didn't make any arrangements with the local government or the fisheries to have a no fishing zone, an area that they could patrol and have till they saw what happened. I spent all my life in the waters around here. From the kid, used to go fishing and figure that I'm not completely stupid. Could see and watch what happened. And I've seen all of this happen through the wrong people with the wrong idea in the wrong place, and it's just a disaster.